Some men climb to the top of the mountain, pound their chests, and declare themselves gods, completely blind to the woman who quietly built the very ground beneath their feet. Theo Harrison was a self-proclaimed tech genius who thought he had outgrown his thrifty plainclothes wife, Beatrice. Handing her divorce papers, he smirked, telling her he needed a woman of his own caliber. He walked out the door toward his flashy mistress, expecting to live like a king. He didn't know that Beatrice didn't just pack her bags that night. She packed his entire financial existence. The absolute freefall was about to begin. Theo Harrison to his friends, Mr. Harrison to his terrified junior developers, was riding the highest wave of his life. At 34, he was the CEO of OmniCloud Solutions, a fast-growing data logistics firm based out of a sleek, glass-walled office in downtown Boston. OmniCloud had just secured a $40 million Series B funding round from Oak and Iron Ventures, one of the most ruthless and prestigious private equity firms on the East Coast. In Theo's mind, he was a titan. He was the next big thing, the visionary who had pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He wore tailored Zegna suits, drove a matte black Porsche Panamera, and drank $80 glasses of Macallan 18 at the Capitol Grill on Boylston Street. He belonged to a world of wealth, ambition, and relentless progress. But then there was his wife, Beatrice. Bea, as she preferred to be called, was a relic of Theo's past. They had met at a modest state college when Theo was just a struggling computer science major, eating instant ramen, and Bea was a quiet, unassuming literature student. 10 years later, while Theo had aggressively evolved into a corporate shark, Bea had seemingly stayed exactly the same. To Theo, she was painfully ordinary. While the wives of his tech peers were getting cosmetic touch-ups, wearing Cartier Love bracelets, and organizing charity galas, Bea was perfectly content driving a 2014 Honda CR-V with a rattling muffler. She bought her clothes from sales racks at Macy's, favored oversized oatmeal-colored cardigans, and spent her weekends volunteering at an animal shelter in Brookline. Worse, she was notoriously frugal. If Theo left a light on in the hallway, Bea would remind him about the electric bill. If he suggested a spontaneous weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, she would pull up a spreadsheet and point out that it wasn't in their quarterly budget. Theo resented it. He was a multi-millionaire on paper, the CEO of a company valued at over $100 million. Yet he came home to a woman who clipped digital coupons for laundry detergent and made him take leftovers to work in Tupperware. He felt suffocated by her small world mentality. He felt she was an anchor, dragging down his ballooning status. He never bothered to look closer. If he had, he might have noticed that Bea never actually asked him for money. He might have noticed that the spectacular, sprawling four-bedroom brownstone they lived in on Commonwealth Avenue was mysteriously managed by a faceless property group called BHA Holdings that never raised their absurdly low rent. He might have noticed that whenever OmniCloud Solutions was on the brink of bankruptcy in its early days, an anonymous angel investor miraculously swooped in to save it. But Theo didn't notice. Narcissism is a powerful blinder. Enter Savannah Cole. Savannah was the newly hired director of public relations at OmniCloud, and she was everything Bea was not. Savannah was 28, sharp-tongued and dripping in designer labels. She walked into the office every morning like it was a runway, the red soles of her Christian Louboutin heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood. She wore tailored pencil skirts, silk blouses unbuttoned just enough to be distracting, and carried a notoriously hard-to-get Hermes Birkin bag. Savannah was intoxicating. She looks at Theo not with the warm, familiar, and slightly motherly affection that Bea did, but with raw, unadulterated admiration and hunger. When Theo spoke in boardroom meetings, Savannah hung onto his every word. She validated his ego, constantly telling him how brilliant he was, how visionary his strategies were, and how he was destined for the cover of Forbes. It started innocently enough late-night strategy sessions over sushi from Oya, then drinks at the Alibi Bar, and finally, a working weekend at a luxury boutique hotel in New York. During that weekend in Manhattan, sitting across from Savannah at Maria as she delicately ate sea urchin pasta and laughed at his jokes, Theo made his decision. He looked at this glamorous, ambitious woman across the table and then thought of Bea, who was probably back in Boston knitting on the couch and drinking discount herbal tea. He was a king. Kings didn't settle for peasants. He needed a queen. The affair escalated with predictable cliché intensity. For 6 months, Theo lived a double life that thrilled him. He was showering Savannah with the lifestyle she expected, and frankly, the lifestyle he felt he deserved to provide. He bought her a $20,000 diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany & Co., funded a lavish 2-week vacation for her and her friends in St. Bart's, and co-signed a lease for a stunning, glass-walled penthouse apartment overlooking the Seaport District, where they spent their illicit evenings. Theo paid for all of this using his Black American Express Centurion card, a card he assumed he had earned through his CEO status and immense corporate credit. The bills were automatically paid every month from a joint wealth management account that Bea handled. Theo never checked the balances. He was the earner, she was the bookkeeper. That was their dynamic. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. Theo had just returned from a supposed investor conference in Chicago, which was actually a romantic getaway with Savannah in Napa Valley. He walked into their Commonwealth Avenue brownstone. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted chicken. Bea was in the kitchen, wearing faded denim jeans and a loose gray sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She was kneeling on the floor, tightening a loose hinge on one of the lower cabinets with a screwdriver. The sight of her doing manual labor, looking so utterly pedestrian, filled Theo with a sudden, overwhelming wave of disgust. "Theo, you're back," Bea said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her voice warm and steady. "How was Chicago?" Theo didn't take off his coat. He stood in the entryway, his posture rigid. "I wasn't in Chicago, Bea. I was in Napa. With someone else." Bea froze. The dish towel slipped slightly from her grip, but her face remained remarkably composed. She didn't scream. She didn't drop to her knees. She just stood up, slowly, and looked at him with dark, unreadable eyes. "I see," she said quietly. The calmness in her voice unnerved him. He had expected hysterics, tears begging. The stoic reception made him angry. He wanted to feel justified, and for that, he needed her to act like the weak, dependent woman he believed she was. "Her name is Savannah," Theo pushed, stepping into the kitchen. "She's dynamic. She's ambitious. She actually understands the world I operate in. I'm sorry, Bea, but I've outgrown this." "I've outgrown you. I'm building an empire, and you're still trying to save 50 cents on paper towels. You're a financial and social anchor. I need a partner who matches my caliber." Bea looked around the kitchen, then back at Theo. A very faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of profound, chilling realization. "A financial anchor," Bea repeated softly, testing the words on her tongue. "I've already had my lawyers draft the papers," Theo said, pulling a thick manila envelope from his leather briefcase and tossing it onto the kitchen island. It landed with a heavy, dismissive thud. "I'm willing to be generous. I'll give you a lump sum alimony payment, enough for you to buy a nice little condo in the suburbs, but I want you out of this house by the end of the week. I'm moving on." Bea looked at the envelope, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she walked past Theo, her shoulder lightly brushing his. "You don't need to give me a week, Theo. I'll be gone tonight. Don't be dramatic," Theo scoffed, rolling his eyes. Just take the money and start over. Thea stopped at the bottom of the staircase. She turned back to look at him, her gaze piercing right through his expensive suit and inflated ego. I don't want your money, Theo. In fact, you can keep exactly what you brought into this marriage. Theo chuckled, a harsh, arrogant sound. Without my money, you have nothing. We'll see, she said smoothly, ascending the stairs. 3 hours later, Bea walked out the front door with a single, medium-sized Samsonite rolling suitcase. She didn't take the furniture, she didn't take the artwork, she didn't even take the 2014 Honda CR-V, leaving the keys on the kitchen counter. Theo watched from the living room window as a sleek, black, heavily tinted Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the curb. A chauffeur in a sharp suit stepped out, took Bea's modest suitcase, and opened the door for her. Theo frowned. A Maybach. Must be an expensive Uber Black, he thought, dismissing the anomaly. He poured himself a glass of scotch, kicked his feet up on the coffee table, and texted Savannah. The anchor is cut. The castle is ours. The first 48 hours of Theo's new life were euphoric. Savannah moved her extensive wardrobe into the Commonwealth Avenue brownstone immediately. They drank champagne, ordered caviar delivery, and celebrated Theo's newfound liberation. Theo felt lighter, younger, and utterly invincible. Then came Friday. Theo had arranged a celebratory dinner at Grill 23 and Bar, inviting 3 of his key executives to officially introduce Savannah as his new partner. The bill came to a staggering $4,200. Theo didn't flinch. He casually tossed his black Amex onto the leather check presenter, continuing his story about how he planned to double OmniCloud's revenue by Q3. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He looked deeply uncomfortable, leaning down to whisper in Theo's ear, "Mr. Harrison, I am so sorry, but your card has been declined." Theo stopped mid-sentence. The table fell silent. Savannah raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Excuse me," Theo said, his voice sharp. "That's impossible. Run it again." "I did, sir. 3 times. The terminal says the account has been frozen." Flustered and embarrassed under Savannah's suddenly sharp gaze, Theo pulled out a personal Visa card and handed it over. The waiter returned moments later. "Sir, this one is declining as well." Theo's face flushed a deep crimson. He had to ask his CFO, David Reynolds, to cover the bill, promising to reimburse him the next day. The drive home was agonizingly silent. Savannah stared out the window, her jaw tight. "It's just a bank error," Theo assured her as they walked into the brownstone. Probably an automated fraud trigger because Bea's name was taken off the joint accounts. "I'll fix it in the morning." But Saturday morning brought no fixes, only deepening chaos. Theo sat at his home office desk, dialing the private concierge number for his American Express Conchurian account. After answering his security questions, he demanded to know why his card was suspended. "Mr. Harrison, I'm looking at your account," the representative said, her tone meticulously polite. This card was a supplementary line. The primary account holder and guarantor initiated a complete closure of the account at 8 a.m. yesterday. "Supplementary," Theo barked. "I'm the CEO of OmniCloud Solutions. I make $5 million a year. That's my card. Sir, the primary account holder is a corporate entity, BHA Holdings. The authorized signatory, Miss Beatrice Abbott, requested the immediate termination of all supplementary lines. Since BHA Holdings secured the credit line, we must comply with their directive." Theo's blood ran cold. Beatrice Abbott? That was Bea's maiden name. BHA Holdings. That was the property management company that owned their house. Before he could process this, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the actual property management company. It wasn't a monthly statement. It was an eviction notice. The email was dry and legalistic. It stated that the lease on the Commonwealth Avenue brownstone which had been heavily subsidized by the owner as a courtesy to the tenant, was officially terminated due to a breach of contract, specifically an unauthorized resident, Savannah Cole. Theo had 72 hours to vacate the premises, or the locks would be changed and his belongings seized. "Theo," Savannah's voice echoed from the hallway. She walked into the office, holding an envelope. "A courier just dropped this off. It's addressed to you, from the Seaport Leasing Office." Theo snatched the envelope and tore it open. It was a notice of default on Savannah's luxury penthouse. The monthly rent of $12,000, which Theo had set up on autopay, had bounced. "What is going on, Theo?" Savannah demanded, her voice losing its usual honeyed tone, replaced by something hard and panicked. "My landlord says the rent didn't clear, and my private shopper at Bergdorf called the credit card you gave me was rejected this morning." "I'm fixing it," Theo snapped, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled up his banking app. He navigated to his personal checking account, the one where his CEO salary was deposited. He stared at the screen. The balance was $14,210. That was impossible. He made millions. Where was the rest of it? Frantically, he clicked through the transaction history. For the past 7 years, every time his paycheck hit this account, 90% of it had been automatically transferred to an offshore trust to avoid heavy tax burdens, a strategy Bayer had suggested and managed to protect his wealth. He had blindly signed the paperwork. He pulled up the trust documents from his hard drive. He read the fine print, the legal jargon he had never bothered to read before because he was too busy being a visionary. The trust wasn't in his name. It was an irrevocable trust, completely controlled by BHA Holdings, Beatrice's company. He had willingly, legally signed away 90% of his lifetime earnings to his wife's corporate entity in exchange for her paying his living expenses out of her own pocket. He hadn't been funding their lifestyle. He had been a glorified employee on an allowance. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in. He wasn't a self-made titan. He was a man who had built a company on a foundation of sand, and Bayer owned the beach. But the absolute worst was yet to come. His phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Jonathan Vance, Oak and Iron Ventures. Jonathan was the lead partner handling OmniCloud's $40 million Series B. Theo took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Jonathan, good morning." "Theo," Jonathan said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a massive problem. I just got off the phone with the primary limited partner of our tech fund, the one who essentially bankrolls 60% of Oak and Iron's capital." "Okay," Theo said, sweating now. "What's the issue?" "The LP just invoked the moral turpitude and keyman contingency clause in our funding agreement with OmniCloud. They are pulling the $40 million, Theo. They are demanding an immediate audit of your personal expenses billed to the company, and they are moving to force a vote of no confidence to have you removed as CEO by the board." Theo gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. "They can't do that. I'm the founder." "Who the hell is this LP?" There was a long, heavy pause on the line. "It's a private equity syndicate, Theo," Jonathan said quietly. "A firm called Abbott Hughes Capital. The managing director called me personally this morning. Her name is Beatrice Abbott. What the hell did you do, Theo?" Monday morning brought a torrential downpour to Boston, the heavy rain matching the suffocating dread sitting in Theodore Harrison's chest. He hadn't slept since Friday. He had spent the weekend frantically calling lawyers, none of whom would take his case on contingency once they ran a preliminary background check and saw his assets were locked in a fortress of irrevocable trusts. He was functionally bankrupt, but he still had OmniCloud. He was the founder, the genius, the visionary. They couldn't just take his company away because of a marital dispute. That wasn't how business worked. Theo drove his matte black Porsche Panamera into the VIP underground garage of the OmniCloud building, swiping his keycard at the boom gate. The light on the scanner flashed red. Access denied. He scowled, hammering the intercom button. Security, this is Theo Harrison. The gate is malfunctioning. Open it up. Apologies, Mr. Harrison, a static-filled voice replied. Your garage privileges have been temporarily suspended pending board review. You'll have to park in the public lot across the street and enter through the main lobby. Theo slammed his hands against the leather steering wheel, screaming a string of profanities that fogged the windshield. He was the CEO. He paid their salaries. Forced to parallel park in the pouring rain, he sprinted across 4 lanes of traffic, his $3,000 Zegna suit getting soaked, the expensive fabric clinging to him like a wet paper bag. He stormed through the revolving glass doors of the lobby, bypassing the front desk entirely, and marched straight for the private executive elevators. He jammed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Beep. Red light. You've got to be kidding me, Theo breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Mr. Harris. Theo turned to see 2 large security guards in dark suits approaching him. One of them held a visitor's badge attached to a cheap blue lanyard. The board requested we escort you up to the conference room, sir, the guard said, extending the plastic badge. I don't need a visitor's badge for my own company, David, Theo spat, recognizing the guard he usually ignored. Today you do, sir. Company policy for suspended personnel. Suspended. The word hit him like a physical blow. He snatched the badge, draping it over his wet neck, and allowed the guards to flank him as they stepped into the elevator. The ride to the 42nd floor was agonizingly silent. Theo's mind raced, rehearsing his defense. He would charm them. He would remind them of his Q2 projections. He would threaten to take his proprietary algorithms to a competitor. The elevator doors chimed open. Theo marched down the glass-walled corridor, bursting through the heavy oak doors of the main boardroom. Look, Jonathan, this entire situation is a catastrophic misunderstanding, Theo began loudly, projecting his voice to dominate the room. He stopped dead in his tracks. The 12-seat mahogany table was full. His CFO, his COO, and 3 major investors were present, including Jonathan Hayes. But it wasn't Jonathan sitting at the head of the table in the CEO's chair. It was Beatrice. Theo's breath hitched. This was not the woman who knitted on the couch in oversized cardigans. Bea was wearing a razor-sharp, double-breasted charcoal Tom Ford suit that screamed predatory wealth. Her hair was blown out perfectly, framing a face that was completely devoid of the soft, domestic warmth he was used to. On her wrist, replacing her cheap digital watch, was a platinum Patek Philippe. She looked like a seasoned corporate assassin. You're late, Theodore, Bea said. Her voice didn't shake. It was calm, authoritative, and chillingly cold. Take a seat. We were just discussing your severance package. What the hell is this? Theo roared, pointing a trembling finger at her. Get out of my chair. Security, remove her. She has no business being here. Nobody moved. The guards at the door simply crossed their arms. Jonathan Hayes cleared his throat, looking down at the legal pad in front of him. Theo, sit down. Miss. Abbott is the managing director of Abbott Hughes Capital. She controls 60% of Oak and Iron's tech fund. Therefore, she controls the OmniCloud board. Theo gripped the back of an empty leather chair, his knuckles white. He looked wildly around the room. She's a housewife. She volunteers at a dog shelter. She doesn't know the first thing about data logistics. Actually, Bea said, steeping her fingers on the polished wood, I know exactly how your data logistics work. Because I wrote the foundational architecture for the OmniCloud sorting algorithm while you were busy trying to figure out how to compile basic Python in our junior year of college. The room was dead silent. The CFO looked away, distinctly uncomfortable. You're lying, Theo sneered, though a cold sweat was breaking out on his forehead. I built this. My code. My vision. B reached into a sleek leather folder and slid a thick stack of stapled documents down the table. They stopped right in front of Theo. "Those are the patent filings from 7 years ago, Theodore," Bea stated, her eyes locked onto his. "You'll notice the intellectual property is registered to a shell company in Delaware. VHA Holdings, the same company that owns your house, the same company that controls your trust fund. I let you put your name on the door because your ego demanded it, and frankly, a confident frontman is good for raising early capital. But the machine is mine. You set me up," Theo gasped, the reality finally piercing through his armor of narcissism. "This whole time you planned this. You trapped me." Bea let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't flatter yourself. I didn't plan for you to become a deceitful, arrogant philanderer. I planned for the possibility that you were human and might make stupid mistakes. It's called risk management. You were a high-risk asset, Theodore. I just hedged my bets." She leaned forward, the boardroom lights catching the icy intensity in her eyes. "When you married me, you thought you were doing me a favor. You thought I was a poor, simple girl dragging you down. You never bothered to ask how a poor girl managed to keep a startup afloat through 3 near bankruptcies. You just assumed the universe was rewarding your brilliance. I protected you from the real world. I let you play God in your little sandbox. But the moment you looked at me and called me a financial anchor to go play house with a PR rep, the sandbox closed." Theo looked at Jonathan, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. "Jonathan, you can't let her do this. I'm the face of the company. The clients know me. If you push me out, the stock will tank." Jonathan finally looked up, his expression thoroughly bored. "Theo, we've already done the modeling. Miss Abbott's presence on the board actually stabilizes our position. Furthermore, our forensic accountant spent the weekend looking into your corporate expenses." Jonathan slid another folder toward Theo. "The flights to Napa, the St. Bart's Villa, the Tiffany jewelry. You expensed over $300,000 of personal illicit lifestyle choices to the OmniCloud promotional budget, and is a direct violation of your fiduciary duty and a breach of the morality clause in your contract." "It's a rounding error," Theo yelled, panic fully taking over. "I can pay it back. Just unfreeze my accounts." "Your accounts are empty," Bear said flatly. "The board has unanimously voted to terminate your employment at OmniCloud Solutions, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and embezzlement. Because you are being fired for cause, your equity shares revert to the company pool. You leave with nothing. You can't take my company," Theo screamed, slamming his fists on the table, spittle flying from his lips. "I am OmniCloud. You are nothing without me." Faye stood up slowly. She buttoned the jacket of her Tom Ford suit, looking down at the pathetic, wet, red-faced man she had once loved. "David!" Faye called out to the security guard standing by the door. "Mr. Harrison's visitor badge has expired. Please escort him off the premises. If he tries to enter the building again, call the police and have him arrested for trespassing." Theo lunged forward, but the 2 massive security guards were on him in a second, grabbing his arms and yanking him backward. He thrashed, his expensive suit tearing at the shoulder seams, screaming Bea's name, demanding she give him his life back. Bea didn't even blink. She sat back down in the CEO's chair, pulled a tablet toward her, and looked at the CFO. "Now, gentlemen, let's review the Q3 restructuring timeline." As the heavy oak doors shut, sealing Theo out of the empire he thought he built, the last thing he saw was his ex-wife efficiently erasing his entire existence. The humiliation of being physically dragged through the lobby of OmniCloud was an out-of-body experience for Theo. His former employees, people who used to scramble to get out of his way, people who used to hang on his every word, now stood by the glass partitions, holding their coffee mugs, watching with wide eyes and poorly concealed smirks. They tossed him onto the wet pavement of the street. He landed hard, scraping his palms against the concrete. The security guard, David, tossed a small cardboard box containing a few framed photos and a customized Mont Blanc pen onto the sidewalk next to him. Theo sat in the rain for a long time. He was completely numb. It felt as though his brain couldn't process the sheer velocity of his downfall. On Thursday, he had been a king. It was Monday afternoon, and he was a peasant sitting in a puddle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from the fall. He needed his car. He needed to get to Savannah. She would know what to do. She was a PR genius. She could spin this. They could start a new firm together. He still had his brain. He walked across the street to the public parking garage where he had left his Porsche. As he approached the ramp, his stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. A large, grimy tow truck was currently backing up, its hydronic lift sliding under the front wheels of his matte black Panamera. Hey, stop!" Theo yelled, sprinting up the ramp, his wet loafers slipping on the slick concrete. "What are you doing? That's my car." The tow truck driver, a burly man chewing on a toothpick, hopped out of the cab holding a clipboard. "You Theodore Harrison?" "Yes." "Drop the car right now." The driver checked a box on his clipboard and handed Theo a yellow carbon copy. "Bank ordered a repossession. Vehicle is registered to BHA Holdings. Lease was terminated this morning for non-payment." "Have a good one, buddy." Theo stood paralyzed as the hydraulic lift groaned, hoisting the front of his six-figure status symbol into the air. He watched the truck rumble down the ramp and pull out into the Boston traffic, disappearing into the gray rain. He was stranded. He opened his Uber app, fingers trembling as he requested a ride to the Seaport District. Payment method declined. "Please update your billing information." A hysterical, broken laugh escaped his throat. He had to walk down into the MBTA subway station, a place he hadn't been in a decade, to buy a single-ride ticket with the few crumpled damp dollar bills he had in his money clip. He sat on the orange plastic seat of the Red Line train, shivering in his ruined designer suit, ignoring the stares of the college students and commuters around him. By the time he reached the Seaport District and took the elevator up to Savannah's penthouse, he looked like a drowned rat. He punched the passcode into the digital lock and pushed the door open. "Savannah," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Savannah, we need to talk." The penthouse was a disaster zone. The sleek, minimalist living room was strewn with tissue paper, empty shoe boxes, and bubble wrap. Savannah was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, frantically zipping up a massive Louis Vuitton trunk. She was dressed in a beige cashmere travel set, her hair pulled back into a tight, flawless ponytail. She looked up as he entered, her face hardening into a mask of pure ice. "Savannah, thank God," Theo exhaled, moving toward her to pull her into a hug. "You have no idea the day I've had. Bae, she's insane. She hijacked the company. She docked my accounts. We have to." Savannah held up a hand, stepping back so quickly that Theo almost tripped. "Don't touch me, Theo. You're soaking wet, and that rug is Egyptian silk." Theo blinked, his hands hovering in the air. "What? Savannah, what are you doing? Why are you packing?" Savannah rolled her eyes, returning to her luggage. "What does it look like, Theo?" "I'm leaving. I got a call from HR at OmniCloud 3 hours ago. They terminated my contract. Something about my role being redundant under the new management." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "New management being your frumpy coupon-tipping ex-wife who apparently owns the entire eastern seaboard." "We can fight it," Theo pleaded, stepping closer. "We can sue for wrongful termination." "I still have my mind, Savannah. I can build another OmniCloud. I can build something better, We can do it together. Savannah stopped packing. She turned to fully face him, looking him up and down. The look of adoration and hunger she used to give him was completely gone, replaced by profound, unapologetic pity. Build another one with what, Theo? Your ego. She crossed her arms. I read the Bloomberg terminal leaks this morning. Everyone in the financial district knows. You didn't build OmniCloud. You were a glorified mascot. Beatrice Abbott owned the IP. She secured the funding. She paid your bills. You are a fraud. Theo recoiled as if she had slapped him. That's not true. I ran that company. I made the deals. You know me, Savannah. You know I'm a visionary. I know you had a black Amex without a limit, Savannah corrected coldly. I know you had a 60-foot yacht charter in St. But I know you were the CEO of a $100 million company. That was the vision I bought into. But you? Just a guy with no money, no car, and a ruined reputation. I don't do charity work, Theo. I'm a pragmatist. She grabbed her Hermes Birkin bag from the kitchen counter and slipped her phone into it. The landlord gave me until tomorrow to clear my stuff out before they change the locks. The movers are coming in an hour to take the furniture I bought with your Beatrice's money, to a storage unit. I suggest you pack whatever sad little bags you have and leave. You're just going to abandon me. Theo's voice cracked. The reality of his isolation was crashing down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. After everything I did for you. I left my wife for you. Savannah walked toward the front door, pausing only to adjust her sunglasses. You didn't leave your wife for me, Theo. You left your bank account for me. And unfortunately for both of us, the account is closed. She opened the door, not looking back. Goodbye, Theo. Don't call me. My number is changing anyway. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing through the cavernous, half-empty penthouse. Theo stood alone in the center of the living room, water dripping from his ruined suit onto the hardwood floor. He pulled out his cracked phone and scrolled through his contacts. He called his college buddy, Mark, sent a voicemail. He called his old mentor, Richard, sent a voicemail. He called his golf partner, a real estate developer. Ringing voicemail. News travels at the speed of light in the corporate world, and the stench of absolute failure was already clinging to his name. In less than 48 hours, Theo Harrison had gone from a self-proclaimed god of the tech industry to a ghost, and the true freefall hadn't even reached the bottom yet. The descent from the apex of the 1% to the absolute bottom is not a slow, graceful glide. It is a terrifying, vertical drop. By Wednesday, Theo Harrison was living in a $90 a night motel off Route 1 in Saugus, staring at water stains on the ceiling. His bespoke Zegna suit, now smelling of damp wool and cheap fast food, hung over a plastic chair. He had exactly $312 left in a forgotten PayPal account, which he had quickly transferred to a prepaid debit card. Desperation breeds a unique kind of manic energy. Theo spent the first week convinced this was a temporary setback. He was a tech founder. He had a resume that commanded respect. He walked into the public library, logged onto a sticky public computer, and began firing off emails to his extensive network on LinkedIn. He reached out to headhunters at top-tier executive search firms. He even swallowed his pride and emailed competitors he had previously mocked. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just the people weren't hiring him. They were actively treating him like a biohazard. Finally, after 72 hours of ghosting, a junior recruiter at a mid-sized venture firm took pity on him and answered her phone. "Theo, you need to stop calling," she whispered, sounding terrified that someone in her office might hear her. "You are radioactive. Abbott Hughes Capital just finalized a massive strategic partnership with State Street Corporation and Wellington Management. They control billions in institutional flow. Beatrice Abbott didn't just fire you, she blacklisted you. She sent a legal circular to every major PE firm and tech incubator on the East Coast, detailing your gross financial mismanagement. If anyone touches you, they risk losing Abbott Hughes as an LP. You're done in this town. You're done in this industry. Theo dropped the library's plastic handset. The dial tone buzzed in his ear. He needed a lawyer, a shark. He took a bus into downtown Boston and walked into the gleaming glass lobby of Kirtland & Ellis, one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the world. He demanded a consultation, promising them a percentage of his stolen OmniCloud equity. An hour later, he was sitting across from a senior partner who looked at him with the same clinical detachment one might use to inspect a squashed bud. "Mr. Harrison, I have reviewed the trust documents and the OmniCloud incorporation papers filed in Delaware," the lawyer said, tapping a gold pen against his mahogany desk. "There is no case here. Beatrice Abbott didn't steal your equity. You willingly signed it over to BHA Holdings 7 years ago. You legally surrendered your intellectual property to her corporate entity in exchange for operational funding." "I didn't read the fine print," Theo yelled, his voice cracking. "I was 27. I was focused on the product. Ignorance of a contract you signed does not invalidate the contract," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Furthermore, the forensic audit of your expense accounts is bulletproof. You used corporate funds to maintain a mistress and lease luxury real estate. That is embezzlement. Honestly, Mr. Harrison, you should be thanking your ex-wife. If she hadn't fired you internally, the SEC would be knocking on your door by now. My advice: file for personal bankruptcy, leave Massachusetts, and learn a trade. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have paying clients to attend to." Theo stumbled out of the law firm and into the unforgiving Boston cold. The reality of his situation finally settled into his bones, heavy and paralyzing. He hadn't been a visionary. He had been a puppet. In a twisted, agonizing way, he finally began to understand Bayer's brilliance. While he was busy giving interviews to Wired magazine and puffing out his chest at tech conferences, Bayer was the silent architect. She had amassed a fortune through algorithmic high-frequency trading in her early 20s, a true mathematical prodigy. But she hated the spotlight. She knew that the venture capital world was dominated by loud, aggressive, arrogant men. So she found one. Theo realized he was nothing more than a meat shield. A loud, flashy mascot designed to attract the superficial venture capitalists, while Bayer quietly built a financial empire in the shadows, entirely insulated from risk. He was a Trojan horse, and the moment he had outlived his usefulness, the moment he had become a liability by letting his ego and his libido compromise the company's integrity, she had simply hit the kill switch. By the second month, the prepaid debit card was empty. Theo was evicted from the Saugus Motel. With nowhere else to go, he found a room in a dilapidated boarding house in Lynn, Massachusetts. He sold his customized Mont Blanc pen to a pawn shop for $40 to buy groceries. The man who used to drink $80 glasses of Macallan was now rationing generic brand instant noodles. He applied for management positions at retail stores, but his background check always threw up red flags. He was vastly overqualified on paper, yet entirely unemployable due to the whisper network of his corporate disgrace. Savannah, as promised, had vanished. The last he heard through a mutual acquaintance, she had moved to Miami and was dating a real estate developer. She had seamlessly attached herself to a new host, leaving Theo behind like a discarded shell. Theo's ego, once a towering fortress, had been pulverized into dust. He stopped looking in the mirror. He stopped shaving. The tailored suits were replaced by ill-fitting thrift store jeans and heavy winter coats. He became a ghost, haunting the very city he once thought he owned. 8 brutal months had passed since Theo Harrison's expulsion from the empire he falsely claimed to have built. The unforgiving New England winter had finally thawed into a crisp, bright spring, but there was no rebirth for Theo. His descent had bypassed rock bottom and settled into a subterranean purgatory. He was living in a damp, 300-square-foot studio apartment in Lynn, Massachusetts. The walls smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke from the tenant next door. His morning routine, once defined by espresso shots and reading the Wall Street Journal in a bespoke suit, now consisted of splashing cold water on his face in a rusted sink and pulling on a cheap, scratchy blue polo shirt. He had aged a decade in less than a year. The arrogant, sharp-jawed visionary was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out ghost with dark circles under his eyes and a permanent slump in his shoulders. The most exquisite torture of his new life wasn't the poverty. It was the inescapable reality of OmniCloud's monumental success. Under Beatrice's direct, unyielding leadership, the company hadn't just stabilized, it had completely taken over the market. Bea had ruthlessly stripped away the bloated, vanity-driven marketing departments Theo had championed and pivoted the company towards securing classified government defense contracts. Theo tortured himself daily by checking the financial news on his cracked, prepaid smartphone. Beatrice Abbott was everywhere. She was on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Silent Architect, How OmniCloud's True Genius Finally Stepped Out of the Shadows." He read interviews where industry titans praised her surgical precision and mathematical brilliance. In none of these articles was Theo Harrison mentioned as anything more than a former figurehead who was quietly phased out. He had been entirely redacted from his own history. To survive, Theo had swallowed the last microscopic shred of his pride and taken a job as a Tier 1 IT support technician for a massive, soulless, outsourced server management firm called Apex Systems. He made $22.50 an hour. He spent his days in a windowless basement in Somerville, wearing a headset that pinched his ears, walking frustrated dental receptionists through the process of resetting their routers. On a muggy Tuesday afternoon, Theo's supervisor, a 23-year-old named Kyle who vaped indoors and constantly chewed spearmint gum, tapped aggressively on Theo's cubicle partition. "Hey, Harrison, wake up," Kyle barked, tossing a yellow work order onto Theo's keyboard. "We've got a code red VIP ticket." A major whale in the Seaport District is reporting a localized hardware failure in their private server rack. They pay for the platinum SLA, which means an on-site body within the hour. "Grab your tool bag and tuck your shirt in, you look like a mess." Theo didn't argue. He numbly grabbed his canvas bag of cables, cribbers, and diagnostic tools, swiping his MBTA card to catch the Silver Line bus into the Seaport District. It was the first time he had been back to the neighborhood since the day Savannah had kicked him out of her penthouse. The gleaming glass towers felt like a graveyard of his past life. The address on the work order led him to the Pinnacle, the newest, most obscenely expensive residential high-rise on the Boston waterfront. It was an ultra-exclusive fortress of wealth, towering directly over the building where he used to fund his illicit affair. Theo approached the concierge desk, a massive slab of imported black marble. "Apex Systems," Theo mumbled, flashing his cheap plastic badge. "Here for a hardware ticket in the penthouse." The concierge, a man in a suit worth more than Theo's current net worth, looked him up and down with undisguised disdain. "Service personnel are required to use the freight elevator in the loading dock. Take the service corridor to floor 65. Do not track dirt onto the carpets." Theo swallowed the humiliation, walking back out into the alley to find the service entrance. The freight elevator smelled of industrial cleaner and cardboard. As he rode up to the 65th floor, his stomach knotted with a strange, free-falling anxiety. The metal doors slid open, depositing him into a private vestibule. He swiped his temporary access card on the heavy oak door, pushing it open. He stepped into a breathtaking expanse of modern architecture. The penthouse was a sprawling masterpiece of white marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and sleek, minimalist Italian furniture. It smelled of expensive cedar and fresh espresso. It was a realm of unimaginable power. The server closet is down the hall to your right past the library. A crisp, meticulously calm voice echoed from the far side of the massive living room. Theo froze. The heavy canvas tool bag slipped from his shoulder, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that voice. It was the voice that used to remind him to use a coaster on the coffee table. Slowly, as if moving through wet concrete, Theo turned his head toward the expansive seating area. Sitting on a custom-built, curved leather sofa was Beatrice. She was transformed. The oversized oatmeal-colored cardigans were gone, replaced by a razor-sharp, tailored, pristine white Alexander McQueen suit. Her hair was styled perfectly, and a subtle, diamond-encrusted Cartier watch caught the afternoon sun on her wrist. She held a sleek tablet in one hand, calmly reviewing a digital document. Sitting directly across from her, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, was Jonathan Hayes from Oak and Iron Ventures. Both of them looked up at the sound of the dropping tool bag. Jonathan's eyes went wide. The color drained completely from his face as he recognized the haggard, defeated man in the cheap Apex Systems polo shirt standing in the foyer. Bea, however, did not flinch. Her expression remained completely devoid of surprise, anger, or even vindictive joy. Her face was a mask of terrifying, absolute indifference. She looked at Theo with the same mild annoyance one might reserve for a plumber who had arrived 10 minutes late. "Hello, Theodore," Bea said smoothly, her voice betraying absolutely no emotion. Apex Systems guaranteed a 1-hour response time. You are currently at 54 minutes. I appreciate the punctuality. Thea's throat felt as though it had been packed with dry sand. A hot, prickling wave of absolute soul-crushing humiliation washed over him. He wanted the floor to shatter and swallow him whole. He looked at Bea, radiating untouchable wealth and authority, and then down at his own scuffed, unpolished work boots and the frayed hem of his jeans. "Bae," Theo croaked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate rasp. He didn't even know what he wanted to say. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I have nothing." Bea took a slow, elegant sip of her espresso. "The localized server for my private algorithmic trading cluster is running a latency of 400 milliseconds. It needs to be under 8. I assume, given your previous claims of technical genius, you know how to replace a faulty switch and reconfigure the fiber optic patch panel without disrupting my main network." She wasn't gloating. She was speaking to him strictly as a vendor, the hired help. It was a psychological execution. Theo looked at Jonathan, silently begging for some flicker of recognition, some acknowledgement that they used to drink $1,000 scotch together. But Jonathan quickly averted his gaze, suddenly fascinated by the view of the sailboats in the harbor, deeply embarrassed to even be in the same room as the ghost of Theodore Harrison. "Yes," Theo whispered, his head bowing, staring at his boots. "I know how to fix it." "Excellent," Bea said, turning her attention entirely back to a tablet, dismissing his existence from the room. "Please be quick and quiet about it, Theodore. Jonathan and I are finalizing the acquisition of your old competitor, and I abhor background noise." Theo turned around and walked down the long, silent hallway toward the server closet. He opened the heavy acoustic door, immediately enveloped by the loud hum of cooling fans and the flashing green lights of the massive server rack. He set his canvas bag on the cold floor, got down on his hands and knees, and crawled under the main console. He reached into the tangled mass of fiber optic cables, his hands shaking violently. He had once climbed to the very top of the mountain, pounded his chest, and declared himself a god. He had thrown away the woman who built the mountain just so he could feel taller. But now, he was quite literally crawling on his hands and knees in the dark, fixing the internet for the billionaire who owned the sky above him. As he spliced the wires in the suffocating heat of the closet, a single bitter tear tracked through the grime on his face. The anchor he had so desperately wanted to cut hadn't been dragging him down at all. It had been the only thing keeping his ship from smashing against the rocks. And now Theo Harrison was shipwrecked, destined to spend the rest of his life drowning in the shadow of the queen he had foolishly mistaken for a peasant. If this story of brutal karma, shattered egos, and the ultimate financial revenge kept you on the edge of your seat, you are not going to want to miss what we have coming next. Theo Harrison thought he was the smartest man in the room, completely blind to the fact that his quiet, unassuming wife was the mastermind, pulling every single string. It's a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits for you to hand over the keys to your own destruction. If you love seeing Bayer serve up this ice-cold masterpiece of justice, smash that like button right now. Share this video with a friend who appreciates a legendary plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We bring you mind-blowing, jaw-dropping stories like this every single week. Drop a comment below what would you have done if you were in Bayer's shoes. Let's talk about it in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.